Hello, everyone. As Mary mentioned, I'm Kevin Sharp, Head of Business Development Sales at Samsung Biologics. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our first ever virtual networking forum, Shaping the Future of Pharma. Earlier on social media, I noticed many of today's panelists are wearing blue. I wasn't sure if it was because of today's BlueBetterFly theme or the chance of winning a Samsung Galaxy Fold 2 later today. I don't know, maybe it's both. But in case you're wondering, today's BlueBetterFly theme encompasses three core concepts. First, blue, representing Samsung. Second, better, recognizing continuous improvement, striving for better, for a better life. And lastly, fly, illustrating the butterfly effect, where the small things we do every day accumulate and make a broader impact. As the future of pharma is being shaped before our eyes, we as an industry experienced a major disruption from the COVID-19 pandemic that has impacted not only our business activities, but our personal lives and the conveniences of daily living. For me, professionally, I miss traveling to meet and interact with clients on a regular basis. Forums such as today's would have taken place somewhere nice, such as San Diego, or maybe in the Northeast Biotech Hub of Boston. Personally, I miss the opportunity to travel back home to the US, where I could visit family. However, we now rely on technology previously limited to business applications and conduct Zoom parties. While the patients we serve suffer from this virus, our industry is uniquely positioned to provide treatments and cure for humanity's sake. The pharmaceutical industry has come together in both areas of R&D and manufacturing to collaborate with a common goal. Such collaborations include Vir Biotechnology and GSK, AstraZeneca and Oxford University, along with Eli Lilly and Amgen. Samsung Biologics has also had the opportunity to join the fight against COVID-19 through both existing client relationships and forging new partnerships. With this week's news of Pfizer and its biotech partner, BioNTech, releasing phase 3 data on its experimental pandemic vaccine candidate, which shows more than 90% effectiveness, it demonstrates how collaboration can promote innovation and provide hope to a promising future in pharma. As an end-to-end CDMO service provider, Samsung Biologics has witnessed eye-opening development of biologics over the past decade. And these innovative drugs have led to improving and saving countless lives. With increasing advances in science, technology, and innovation, complex therapeutics are set to become even more important in improving healthcare worldwide. Samsung Biologics has positioned ourselves to be a major contributor to support pharmaceutical companies in the development and manufacturing of such treatments, including COVID-19. According to Bio, such innovations are transforming patient outcomes. For example, 83% of children with cancer now survive, compared to just 58% in 1970. There has also been a 22% reduction in cancer deaths since 1991. And more than 730,000 children's lives have been saved in the last 20 years in the US alone due to advances in vaccines. We are honored to be a part of this journey to shape the future of pharma, supporting our global partners in drug development and manufacturing. To keep pace with the ever-growing trends in biodevelopment and manufacturing, Samsung Biologics is committed to delivering high-quality services to help produce life-saving medicines and make them more accessible to patients globally. Our recently announced Plant 4 expansion is in response to the growing demand of biologics, which we believe will benefit not only our clients, but ultimately patients in need all over the world. The scale of capacity offered in Plant 4 will be unmatched, resulting in a standalone end-to-end facility offering services from cell line development to small, mid, and large-scale manufacturing to meet all clinical and commercial needs. I believe we are gathered here with a consensus on the need to address the prolonged global pandemic and healthcare challenges we are all being faced with. Today's COVID-19 Emergence Roundtable will provide a forum for industry leaders to openly discuss not only these challenges, but also the opportunities that have been created for us to make a direct impact in the fight against COVID-19. Many would argue that the COVID-19 pandemic is the greatest healthcare challenge we've faced since the AIDS pandemic, or the pre-penicillin era. Globally, there have been 52.4 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, including 1.2 million deaths, as reported to the World Health Organization. The pandemic is also having an enormous impact on business sectors across all industries, while also receiving public sector support via programs such as Operation Warp Speed, and working closely with pharma companies to ensure expedited approvals and access to treatments and vaccines. Pharma companies have partnered in the fight against COVID-19, breaking down barriers by collaborating and sharing know-how, without a profit-first mindset. As some may say, there will be a new definition of BC, before Corona, and AC, after Corona. Even when the short-term effects end, the long-term economic impacts will ripple for years to come, putting us into a new normal environment where collaboration and innovation will have the opportunity to come together within our industry, such as today's virtual roundtable, where pharmaceutical leaders have gathered to have such a conversation. Is anyone familiar with the notion of Vuca? Vuca is an acronym which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The term was first used at the end of the Cold War, when there was no longer a singular enemy, resulting in new ways of seeing and reacting. The concept is, again, gaining popularity within industry leadership strategies as a term to cover the various dimensions of our uncontrollable environment and uncertain situations. Today, we are fighting a new war against the enemy of COVID-19. The Vuca world was here before COVID-19, but the pandemic has made change faster and harder to predict. In defining a Vuca in a COVID-19 mindset, it would look something like this. Volatility. Changes due to COVID-19 are taking place every day. They have been unpredictable, dramatic, and fast. Uncertainty. No one can predict with confidence when the pandemic will end or when we will have a cure or vaccine. Complexity. The pandemic is affecting all aspects of life, including healthcare, business, the economy, and social life in very complex ways. Ambiguity. There is no best practice that organizations can follow to manage the challenges caused by the pandemic. Luckily enough, with the many pharma and biotechs joining forces with resilience, perseverance, and innovation, we are hearing positive news about promising drug candidates, providing hope for a vaccination in the near future. Such collaboration is enabling the development and supply of treatments with unprecedented speed, where we as an industry and as humans have come together to further enrich mankind. Bill George, Senior Fellow at Harvard Business School, has defined a new type of leadership. He calls it Vuca 2.0, giving a completely new meaning to the acronym. V, vision. As today's business leaders, you need the ability to see through the chaos to have a clear vision for your organization. U, understanding. An in-depth understanding of your organization's capabilities and strategies to take advantage of rapidly changing circumstances by playing to its strengths while minimizing its weaknesses. C, for courage. Leaders need the courage to step up to these challenges and make audacious decisions that embody risk and often go against the grain. A, adaptability. Embracing the need to be flexible and adapting to this rapidly changing environment is required more now than ever before. As humanity makes choices and we continue to progress, the Vuca world may spell out something to make individuals, families, organizations, and humanity survive. However, the question we must now ask is, how do we thrive instead of just survive? We hope this networking forum will offer you a chance to raise and discuss such questions, as well as share key considerations on business continuity, resilience, and adaptability during and after the pandemic. This forum is designed not only to share with you the experience and insights of our knowledgeable, highly selected panelists, but also to provide a platform for you to share with us your invaluable expertise, opinions, suggestions, and expectations about the future of pharma. Samsung Biologics is a young company that has made significant strides towards the goal of making a positive impact and enriching human lives by creating a biologic ecosystem for our global partners, some of which I mentioned earlier. We don't aim to make such breakthroughs alone. Instead, we ask you, the industry leaders, to join us on the path to achieving this common value and goal, the unmatched objective of better life for mankind. On this notion, Samsung Biologics would like to express our sincere gratitude to all participating professionals gathered here today who are dedicated and willing to realize a common vision to enrich human lives in the industry that we serve. Thank you.
I would now like to introduce our moderator, Ben Comer, Executive Editor at Invivo. Ben brings both biopharma expertise and diverse experience. For the past 5.5 years, he was a senior manager in PwC's Health Research Institute. He developed reports on various policy issues and business trends, particularly in the pharma and medtech sectors, provided research for clients, and spoke at industry events. Previously, he was a journalist with Pharmaceutical Executive, Medical Marketing and Media, PR Week, and Direct Marketing News. And with that, I will hand things over. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mari, and thanks to everyone out there who's watching. We have a really fantastic panel for this discussion, which I'd like to quickly introduce just before we get started. We've got Peter Marks, who's Director of CBER at the FDA. Got Ken Getz, Deputy Director of the Tufts Center for the the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development. We have Karen Young, the U.S. Health Industries Leader at PwC. We have Dr. Michelle McMurray Heath, President and CEO at Bio. We have Phil Pang, Chief Medical Officer at Vir. And last but not least, Anna Cespedes, who is Chief Operating Officer at IAVI. Apologies. Let's go ahead and get started. We're talking in this session about lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic and looking toward a brighter future. But I think it's important to acknowledge here at the top that COVID-19 case counts and hospitalization rates have reached an all-time high in the U.S. With now over 241,000 deaths to date. So the work and learnings will continue, but let's start at the onset of the pandemic. And my first question for the panel is, what were the biggest challenges for your organization following the COVID-19 lockdown, and how did you overcome these challenges? And Phil, I'd like to start with you on that.
Thank you so much, Ben. Well, I think that the challenges were really divided between those who had to be that could be socially distanced and those that could not. So I think that, as you know, we are working on a prophylactic and therapeutic for COVID. And of course, if the people can't get to the lab and can't work, that becomes a huge major challenge. And at the very beginning, we had challenges even securing basic personal protective equipment. For those that could be socially distanced, i.e. those the non-lab workers, it was a much more straightforward process. We were able to overcome that using, technologies such as Zoom and video conferencing. And I would say it got us, 85% of the way there. But in terms of getting our lab workers into the lab and working, it really took a lot of creativity, a lot of shift work, a lot of recognition that, it could take, for example, 20 minutes to gown up for a BSL-3 experiment, and that person would be stuck in there for 4 hours and might not be able to use the bathroom even, for example. So I think creating a lot of fluid processes that allowed people to really get in and out and get their work done was something that really just took a lot of creativity and time.
Great, and I want to bring you into this question as well, Anna, maybe speaking about your organization on the biggest challenges initially with the lockdown and how you overcame those.
You're gonna go first?
Yeah, Anna, that one's for you. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, I can go. Sorry, I didn't hear my name. So we set up for ourselves what we call like a triple mission. So first, we needed to protect the patients. That was a challenge, patients that were in our trials. Second, to protect our employees. And then to also shift our research to bring value into COVID, like leverage our infectious diseases expertise into this space. So in terms of protecting patients, we stopped, obviously, as everybody else, we paused recruitment for the trials. We implemented remote monitoring tools. And we also, put a lot of attention into data integrity, because you risk losing this data. In terms of employees, we had a similar experience to the one from Phil. There were a group of people who needed to be in the lab all the time, and just securing the approvals to get these people in the lab was an effort in itself. Then a significant part of the people were working from home. And in those cases, something we've been seeing at the beginning, and we see this increasingly, was implementing activities and tools to enable these people feel comfortable working from home, from learning to manage a team remotely to mental health. Because some people were having pretty tough situations, being alone at home, living in an apartment with no family for months. And then finally, moving our research towards COVID. That was probably the most exciting part of everything, moving our antibody and vaccine platform, leaving a little bit on the side, HIV, TB for a little bit, and trying to see how we could unlock pathways in antibodies and vaccines for COVID.
Great, and I want to follow up this question on I think you mentioned an important piece of this that has nothing to do with technology, which is simply, learning how to work at home and do all sorts of things remotely. But what kinds of technology were most useful for maintaining business operations? And Peter, I want to go to you with this one, maybe for the FDA perspective on this question.
Yeah, so we actually just to back up, we have had some of the same problems as everyone else, because we actually have laboratories that do applied scientific research. Those were the most challenging to deal with here still, and the move to telework has been very much welcomed. I think the technology. We're using a fair amount of WebEx, fair amount of Zoom, and we've even now started with Teams. Everyone has their own favorite platform. I think actually the largest problems we've actually seen is actually trying to manage people just overbooking things from dawn till dusk on these platforms, because what we've noticed is that people can get so booked for meetings now that they don't have time to keep up with the email. And email traffic is probably about 5 times. I don't know about your organizations, but since the pandemic, it's gone up by about 5 times over it was pre-pandemic, because that's how everyone's working. So if you don't have time to get your email, then we've had people overworking. So we're using pretty standard tools, usual email and various platforms, be it Zoom, WebEx, or Microsoft Teams, and they're doing the job. Nothing
Great,
exciting.
and Karen,
nothing really exciting, but there's nothing. We're kind of vanilla. We're making use of the vanilla options.
Yeah, Ken, did you want to jump in?
I just wanted to add, I think a lot of the points that are made are exactly what we've experienced as well. One of the areas that I just wanted to point out is that organizations that were already operating with a partial remote workforce, and they'd already experimented with certain tools. They perhaps had piloted some of these, the adaptation, some of the pivoting. It was a lot easier for them early on. And they, in some cases, Peter, they even had a standard in place, whereas other organizations had to quickly pivot and find that standard platform.
Yep. Can I just,
yeah, great. And Karen, yeah, go ahead.
Jump in to say that is exactly correct. That for us, because we've been telework ready and we've had to deal with various issues, it made a huge difference. I mean, people were generally ready to go when it came, and that made a big difference.
Karen, I wanted to see if you had anything to add on this point. You know, PwC is a large firm with a network that stretches all over the world. You know, what kinds of technology were most important for you in transitioning into pandemic mode?
So Ben, thanks. And I think, you know, we really, started preparing for, upskilling our workforce several years ago. And so when we had to shift and shut down offices, regions, locations, and pivot a lot of our work that we do on site, side by side with clients and go into a virtual mode, those tools such as Alteryx and Tableau and, various virtual abilities to communicate with each other, WebExes, Zoom calls. We pivoted pretty well. I would say very proud of what we were able to do. And it was all making sure the safety and productivity of our employees was always top of mind to make sure that they were comfortable in the environment they were in. And then you think about business continuity, which is something we talk about a lot. And many companies prepare for the business continuity, but I'm not sure everyone prepared to go virtual so quickly. And just to comment, I think Ken made the comment about the grind of 24/7. And I think we try and make sure we keep that top of mind with our employees and teams, as well as our clients, as we engage throughout the day in getting projects done and interactions.
Great. And I'm wondering how folks on this call would rate the biopharma industry's response to the pandemic, and maybe what you might do differently in hindsight. And Ken, I'll start with you on that one.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ben. I from where we sit, I would give the research enterprise high marks for the way it has pivoted in relatively short period of time. And if you look at how quickly we have been able to adjust but remain productive and innovative, we're looking at over 400 treatments and vaccines in development. We'll talk more about what's happened to ongoing clinical trials of non-COVID treatments. I think most organizations are finding 8 months in that their companies, their organizations have remained relatively productive. In fact, in some cases, they're experiencing much higher growth than they anticipated when we first went through extensive lockdowns. So short term, I would give us all high marks. In our opinion, it's the long-term place where we have yet to see the kinds of behaviors that would garner similar marks. And let me be specific. A lot of what we're doing is piloting various initiatives, putting support behind them. But like so many other innovations that we pilot, if we don't build the foundation to move the pilot into more common practice, we're going to run the risk of seeing these pivots be essentially one-time occurrences. Not many organizations have developed a decentralized clinical trial governance plan and a way to scale that and maintain that. They haven't developed continuity plans to move other programs into this model. And so it's that kind of thing. Workflow has not been modified fully to really anticipate long-term changes in the way we operate. And so I'm waiting to see what will happen long-term before I can give you, Ben, a grade, a rating. That's basically our view.
Michelle, how would you rate the industry's response to the pandemic so far?
Yes, well, first of all, thanks for having me. And I must say at Bio, we get a very interesting view because the Biotechnology Innovation Organization represents over 1,000 biotech companies. And so we've seen many of them small companies. We've seen how they've pivoted on a dime to be able to really try to assist in the response to COVID. So I would give them an A or A plus because I really think it's been remarkable to see what they've accomplished. You know, we're up to over 800 development programs now actually globally for antivirals, therapeutics, and vaccines. 191 vaccines are in development. I'm sure Peter's team has many a late night because of all of that activity. But it really speaks to international collaborations between big companies and small companies, collaborations with industry and governments. It's just been remarkable to see the flexibility of our different industry members to really try to be a part of the answer.
And Peter, before we move on, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the performance of the biopharma industry thus far.
Yeah, I actually agree with all the grades. This is like a uniform group of graders. I agree that this has been very high marks for industry and being able to pivot, being able to adjust, being able to work and collaborate, communicate, maintain continuity of trials where it would have been easy to walk from some of these, but they've gone through all of the extra effort to keep patients who contributed to trials in trials and using remote assessments when possible. So very high marks. I wish I could say the same about some of the challenges with getting academic clinical trials moving the same way. But I think industry has done an incredibly good job.
And can I just jump in there as well and just give a salute to Dr. Marks, because part of the amazing response that you've seen in industry is the incredible support that we've seen from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And I say that as a former FDA official. They have been incredible in their flexibility, their creativity, and their incredible commitment to making sure that we have safe and effective products to fight COVID.
Yeah, and Michelle, I'll stay with you for this next question on which regulatory or legislative actions have been most important or useful to bio or to, I guess, the biopharma industry at large during COVID, in your opinion?
Well, you have the man that coined Operation Warp Speed, Peter Marks, on our panel today, but it's really been this incredible concerted cross-governmental effort to say we're going to help with the research and development portion, we're going to help with the regulatory portion, we're going to help with assured purchasing programs so that companies know that if they're successful, there'll be a market. And then we're going to help through the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to have a distribution plan that makes sense and that works out the logistical kinks that sometimes stands between patients and the last mile of therapy. So it has been the coordination that has been most remarkable and most influential.
Great, and I'm curious too about the rate of communication. And Anna, I want to ask this question to you. Has your communication with regulators increased during the pandemic, and why or why not?
Yeah, I think I want to echo what is being said. FDA has been extremely responsive, not only in terms of providing the right support that you needed, but also very fast. That you could submit pre-IND information and very, very soon you would get an answer. And this has been pivotal for success and to be able to move. So I really think that it's been tremendous, the support that everybody has been providing to advance. Within all the bad things that were happening around us, this was really, making feel very good. This level of support of regulators and collaborators in other labs and in the pharmaceutical industry.
Great, and I also want to ask, there's this issue of vaccine hesitancy that people are talking about. I've seen signs on the doors of Walgreens and CVS pharmacies saying we do not yet have a COVID-19 vaccine yet. So I think there are two sides of the story here, but I wanted to ask, what should government agencies like the FDA, HHS, and CDC do to promote public confidence in a COVID-19 vaccination and therapeutics following an authorization or an approval? And Phil, I want to go to you on that question.
Thank you so much, Ben. So maybe I'll take a three-prong approach to answering that. The first is, obviously, confidence is built through trust, and trust is built locally. And I think that we really need to be reaching into the communities and having all the physicians be able to have some place where they can go to be educated themselves. Because if the local physicians don't feel confident, then of course there's no way we can expect the general population, to feel confident. And so I think that that's one major avenue. But I would say that as we do so, I think one of the things that at least I'm seeing anecdotally, and you came up with a good example of, going to Walgreens and people realizing there's not a vaccine. We have challenges because, of course, a monoclonal can be used for both prevention and treatment, and people are confused whether or not a vaccine is taken before or after you get COVID. So if that is the challenge before us as a nation and as a world community, we have a long way to go, and we need to be really getting out in front of it. And I think the biggest challenge will be differentiating between clarity and oversimplification. I think some of that challenge we had with, for example, the mask confusion, and I think we need to avoid that confusion so that people are realizing, yes, vaccines are awesome, prevention is the way to go, that is how we are going to end this pandemic, but at the same time, we can't neglect the fact that treatments will also be necessary. And as we go out there and have this campaign, it shouldn't be, you get your vaccine, you don't have to worry about COVID anymore. I think, complications like the need to achieve herd immunity and therefore the need for treatment until that is achieved is something that is complex, but we need to get out there in front of it and not just have people asking the question, when is a vaccine available, but everything in the ecosystem that's going to be necessary to achieve control of this pandemic.
Peter, what do you think that government agencies should do to promote confidence in vaccines or therapeutics after an authorization?
Yeah, so I think for us, it's a little different for therapeutics than vaccines, right? Because I think we don't see therapeutic hesitancy the same way we see vaccine hesitancy. And that's fundamentally why what we have to do with vaccines is different than therapeutics. I think that our EUA mechanism for therapeutics, I don't think that's a problem. People aren't worried about the efficacy standard there, which is that the product may be effective, because if you're really sick with something, you're pretty happy to see anything that's going to help you. On the other hand, for prophylactic vaccines for healthy people, even when it gives you a sore arm, you're kind of grumbly about it, even though it might protect you against something pretty bad. I think we need, for the vaccine end of things, I think we have to have as transparent a process as we possibly can about what we're doing at FDA to make sure that they're safe and effective. We're going to be absolutely transparent, have public advisory committee meetings, post our documents, and then ultimately, I think we will have to work with CDC and get communities engaged, because it's going to be when you look at the list, it's like, well, if my primary healthcare provider tells me that it's good and they're going to take it, maybe I'll take it. And then after that, it's, well, if my pastor tells me or my clergyman tells me that they're going to take it, I'll take it. And then if it's my friends are taking it, I'll take it. So we're going to need to get people engaged in this. And I do think this is a place where kind of a campaign of we're all in it together will be necessary. But it's going to be on that foundation that at FDA we've done the job to make sure that people can see that there's no funny business, that this is the real deal that we've put out there.
Excellent. And I want to move on to looking into the future a bit. And Karen, I'll start with you. What new opportunities, strategies, or silver linings have come out of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, and I think it's been mentioned a few times, right? The collaboration across the different aspects of the health economy and ecosystems, whether it's governments, academic medical centers, pharma, or biotechs. But in addition, also the transparency aspect that has really been paramount during this pandemic. I believe the industry itself has been much more transparent because they've had to be. And I think the patients and consumers are really going to look for that transparency to continue. Back to the comment around trust around vaccine. one thing that we see that will hopefully start to happen post this pandemic, we're calling it the CEO flight simulator concept. And that, how do you forecast for the future? This won't be the last pandemic. This won't be the last natural disaster or disruption to our health economy. And so how do CEOs get behind forecasting, scenario planning for the what-if scenarios? They've been through so much in the past 8 months. They've got a lot of data and insights into what worked, what didn't work, and how quickly they needed to pivot. And so how do you look for those early warning signs? How do you look for those opportunities to be more agile in the future around supply chain, R&D, and production?
Great. And Anna, I wanted to, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add to Karen's comments, and I agree with them completely. Just a few other areas to toss out. One is the remarkably high awareness and visibility, public awareness and public visibility around the importance of clinical research. And that's been a silver lining for the pandemic. It's had an interesting and harmful effect on the public's willingness to participate in clinical research. So while awareness has risen, willingness to participate has actually declined. But I think we can really build on this foundation and to the points that Phil and Peter made with a really concerted and coordinated education effort. I think we can really address that. So it's really created that renewed awareness. And then the other point, something I had made earlier, just the volume of activity that many organizations are dealing with, unexpected increases in activity. There's been a real silver lining for many companies. They're busier now than they've ever been before. And Peter, to your point, the email boxes are just growing and growing. So I think everybody feels like cutting out their commuting time has added more hours in the day for us to actually be doing more productive things.
And it looks like we may have lost Peter, but Anna, I wanted to follow up with you on the, Karen's point about partnership and collaboration. And, if you think you're likely to be outsourcing more or less, or if there's anything you would add about changes to the collaboration model.
Yeah, I really echo what Karen said. I think the collaboration between pharma and organizations like us, so we are a public-private partnership, has been fantastic, like starting to work without having all the legal paperwork completely figured out. And we were just already working together because we needed to make it happen. To me, that has been a model that has enabled fast progress and needs to continue. I also would like to highlight then the importance of organizations like CEPI. So CEPI was created in 2017 to really tackle these topics, and we've seen CEPI in action, and I think Richard Hatchett has done a tremendous job in really advancing kind of R&D programs towards these areas. I probably think we need something similar to CEPI for the therapeutics space, and I think this is something that we might need to advance in the future. Initiatives such as COVAX, with the leadership of Gavi, to really make sure those vaccines will also reach low middle income countries. I think this collaboration between public and private entities to really ensure both development but also supply later on has been something that we've put in practice certain mechanisms, and we have realized certain gaps that we'll have to fix in the future.
Right. And Ken, I wanted to get back to, you mentioned this previously, but I'm curious about how COVID-19 has impacted product development in therapeutic areas beyond COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics. I mean, are you expecting, to see a kind of some products being pushed back later or getting approved later due to the necessary focus on COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics, or no?
It's a great question. We're actually trying to forecast that now at the center. So we're modeling the impact, and it's more nuanced. So let me see if I can sort of lay this out. If you look right at the massive lockdown, the mass lockdown phase, sort of right around the middle of March timeframe, all the way through to June, we saw the suspension or the delay of roughly a quarter of all ongoing clinical trial activity for non-COVID treatments. About a third of all trials pivoted to more of a remote or virtual model, and about 45% actually continued following their original protocol, in part because the risk to the study volunteer or the patients was too great to transition to more of a decentralized model. And we saw a huge shift in the number of sites that were open for enrollment. 90% of all sites had to close enrollment so that they could make adjustments themselves. And so we started to see a number of trials delayed. But in the last several months, we've seen rapid uptick in later stage trials now, with a large number of sites open, and they project 2 to 3 month delay maximum for a lot of these studies. It's the earlier phase trials that have been slower to ease in, and it's also been the studies that were conducted within academic settings that took the longest to pick up again. So we anticipate that there will be delays, Ben, but not nearly as extensive as we thought back in the April, May, June timeframe, when we saw such a massive change in delays and suspensions as well.
Great. And getting back to COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics, Peter, I want to ask you, what do you think is most important regarding the manufacture and distribution of vaccines and therapeutics following an authorization or an approval?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the manufacturing, an incredibly high quality, high standard of quality for the manufacture of these vaccines, and I think the manufacturers have committed to that. I do think that one of the key things here that partners and non-governmental partners, as well as some corporate partners, on is trying to keep straight who's on first, because it's very likely that we're going to have multiple 2-dose vaccine regimens deployed at the same time. And although eventually we may have mix and match studies done, right now we don't. And so making sure people understand, because people move around a lot in this country, and for a vaccine that's given on day 1 and 21 or day 1 and 28 or day 1 and 22, it ends up being that we're going to need to make sure we keep straight who gets what, and that make sure that people come back for those second doses. So I think I worry less about what because I think Biopharma is going to make a very high quality product. I think that because we've had some experience with, everyone's worried about the cold chain piece of it. Yeah, I'm a little worried about the cold chain, but I think we can figure that out. My biggest worry is you got to get the vaccine in the arm, into the person, then you got to get the person back, and you got to make sure that the same vaccine, same manufacturer's vaccine to go in that arm twice. I think that could be a little challenging here, so we're trying to work through that. So I know it sounds very basic logistic-y, but that may be one of the most important things in operationalizing things.
Yeah, and Michelle, I'd love to have you weigh in on this question as well about what's most important. And I'm also, thinking about the infrastructure for getting the vaccine to people in rural areas. What's top of mind for you in terms of a successful manufacturing and distribution model?
Well, I think it's really variety. So, I mentioned that there's 191 COVID vaccines in development, 10 of which are in late-stage clinical trials. Some of those only take 1 dose. Some of those are stable at room temperature. So we want to make sure that we have a wide range of possibilities to serve the needs of so many different treatment sites. So it's going to be a robust plan that CDC has already drawn up with help of external experts from the National Academy of Medicine. And now it's just about getting across that final finish line of finishing up the trials and getting the data and making sure that all of the ones that we think are going to work are safe and effective and have been tested by FDA, and then going out with those distribution plans that really hope to get them to local pharmacies. We're hoping by the spring of 2021.
Great, and Phil, I want to bring you in on this I think really important question too about successful manufacture and distribution, and maybe from the therapeutics perspective, you know, what are you thinking about? What's Veer thinking about in terms of making sure people have ready access, you know, at the right time in the right place for therapeutics?
Thank you, Ben. So maybe I'll just say that, you know, as I said once at a talk at Stanford, I said that vaccines are for billions and treatments will be for millions. The challenges of manufacturing a vaccine for billions is enormous, but also the challenge of manufacturing therapeutics for millions is enormous. You know, for example, you know, Samsung is one of the largest CMOs for monoclonal antibody manufacturing. You know, trying to get millions of doses of a monoclonal antibody out the door has never been achieved before. But I would also want to echo that it's not just a capacity question. I think that the biggest challenge facing, you know, even for example, the recent EUA for Lilly will be the last mile question, which, you know, whether or not it's, as Dr. Mark said, you know, this challenge of, you know, making sure that the right person gets the right drug, or rather the right vaccine and the right arm or in the correct arm. I would say that, you know, this is the same challenge. Like, how do we get physicians and patients to really appreciate that there will be something beneficial out there? How do we get them to actually take it? And then how do we make it accessible? And I think that that is where really biopharma can do only so much. You know, when it's aspirin and we've been working on it for 50 years, it's one thing to have an aspirin in every Walgreens. It's a totally different story for a lot of these other medicines and vaccines and therapeutics. And I think that that last mile challenge is something that only can be achieved with a really tight partnership with government and non-government agencies.
Great. Karen, do you have any thoughts? Yeah, please.
No, just a simple, I mean, to echo what Ben said, I think people is talking a lot about vaccines. They are absolutely important, no doubt about that, but we also need therapeutics. And therapeutics have, and in particular monoclonal antibodies, there are a few in development. There are 2 who have already submitted emergency use authorization. Lilly got that one on Monday. We still need more of those. The doses are pretty high. That is significantly costly to manufacture them, and they didn't capture so much help, investment. And if you think on, for example, Ayabi, we care a lot about that, low middle income countries, how you make accessible a monoclonal in those geographies. I really think a significant attention is also needed in the therapeutics space, because those are IV drugs. So the administration of an IV monoclonal antibody is not the same as another type of treatment. You need to diagnose the patient very soon so they can benefit the most from the therapeutic window. So there are nuances that I think are extremely important.
Yeah,
Great, and Karen, I wanted to, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add, I think, you know, summary of what everybody pretty much just said, but the complexity around the distribution and getting it from manufacturer to distributor to the right site, to the right provider, pharmacy, and then ultimately in the arm, that's going to require a lot of forecasting, planning, you know, collective working together, which is, we've seen a lot of that happen just to, you know, almost get to the part here where we think we've got a vaccine ready to go. And we're going to have multiple vaccines. And so when you put the patient first and its safety and efficacy, which is the most critical, important aspect of, you know, vaccine and inoculating, you know, public health and the population at large, understanding those complexities in the distribution, understanding the cold chain aspects. I think everybody's thinking about all those nuances and making sure that the controls and the processes and every perspective has been thought about to make sure that once distribution gets ready to roll out, that we've covered all of those aspects.
Hey, Ben, I just wanted to get back on Phil's comment. I think that last mile question, and Peter obviously touched on this as well, that last mile question also really requires the use of ad agency support and really creative educating done in a collective way in plain language, targeted and customized to specific patient communities. That's one area where I really haven't seen much movement yet, but we need to band together that kind of creative energy to help us achieve that last mile piece as well.
Great.
Yeah, that's so true that I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please, Anna, please go ahead.
Just to highlight communication in simple terms
Yeah.
is missing. And we think people understand what an emergency use authorization means or preliminary phase 3 data. People don't know what a phase 1, phase 2, 3 is. And we just need to educate and translate. What does it mean that one day one drug gets an emergency use authorization and then is canceled from that day? We need to explain in simple terms.
Yeah, I think, you know, even when a trial is momentarily stopped due to a single adverse event at a single site, you know, the headline reads, you know, trial halted. And I think oftentimes it's sort of confusing to people, you know, that don't work in the industry or aren't, you know, experts that, you know, that maybe they think the vaccine is not effective or it's dangerous, even though, you know, a trial, you know, a single trial site could be halted briefly, you know, could end up that, the vaccine itself wasn't even responsible for the adverse event. So I think that's a good point, Anna. It's an important one, that the educational effort, both, you know, from policymakers, from industry, as well as, you know, journalists, need to really focus on communicating effectively to the population, given how critical it will be once we get some authorizations and approvals. I also wanted to just ask a question about industry reputation. And Michelle, maybe I'll start with you on this one. I think, you know, the industry is really under a magnifying glass and has been. I've seen statistics showing that reputation has already improved as a result of the response to the pandemic, reputation of the biopharma industry. I'm talking about here, and I wonder what you might say about the opportunity there for industry reputation, and you know what the industry stands to gain or lose.
Well, you know, many of the panelists have talked about how complex the scientific development process is and how hard to understand. And one of the things that's occurred because of the pandemic is the global public has a front row seat to that process. It has a front row seat to biopharma research and development. And that's helping give some understanding and also kind of lift the veil on what it is, why it takes so long, why it's so complicated, how you have setbacks, and how you then have huge breakthroughs and leaps forward. So all of this is tremendously important. But the other thing that's been very, very clear is that our industry has put patients first and science first in their response to this pandemic. They've put them first in going ahead and trying to manufacture millions of doses of vaccines before they even know if they'll be approved, doing it completely at risk so that they'll be at the ready should an approval occur. They've been doing it in standing up in support of science and rigorous regulatory control over the process of science. They've been doing it in standing up for equity. We just yesterday sent a letter to Secretary Alex Azar at HHS touting the results of our recent summit on the importance of equity in the distribution of therapeutics for COVID. So it's really, really critical that the nation and the world see that our companies are very committed to not just creating solutions for patients, but making sure that all patients have access to them as well.
Karen, what would you add on industry reputation? And you may have some thoughts, about what the benefits are of a positive or improved industry reputation.
Sure, yeah, and I agree. Patients first, right? That's always the mission of all of these organizations and the leaders of the organizations. And I think the pandemic has allowed that collective partnering to really drive to the outcome, which is solution and cure around the pandemic. But I keep saying we're in this triple pandemic, right? You got the economic stress, you've got COVID, and you've got inequality, which has really had a spotlight within 2020, not only from the pandemic, but from the social justice issues. And I think this industry as a whole has really rallied together, has put their impact, their innovation, and their thought leadership behind it in order to come up with a cure collectively across the health ecosystem. And the industry will benefit from that overall when you have, patients who understand, all of this that's been, transparent to them now through development of the vaccine, the ability for regulators to become innovative and more efficient in processes in order to see, and the hope is at the end of this, there'll be a lot of stickiness in some of the new innovation aspects that came out of the COVID solution, and you think about the power of what that can then do in oncology or diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So I think the industry has a lot of upside potential. I think they'll maintain this stronghold of consumerism that they've now been kind of spotlighted in and around curing the pandemic. And I think it's up to them to really make sure that they keep that forefront leadership in front of them on additional cures as things move forward.
Hey,
Yeah,
Dan, if I could
Ken,
just add a,
please.
These are great points about industry reputation. And I just wanted to add that we were in this situation a good, 15, 20 years ago, where industry and the clinical research enterprise was at a high point in its in the public's view, the public trust of the social good and the benefit to public health. And we slowly fell out of favor, in part because of that lack of transparency. Some of the things that you mentioned, Karen, this is a kind of a reset moment for us during the pandemic, where we've now come back on top with a highly visible view, and the public is seeing a lot of progress. It's really conveying and emphasizing a lot of the strengths and the innovative power of our industry. But the transparency piece is so critical. As we start to really see the results of some of our late-stage COVID studies, for example, we have to find ways to translate those results into plain language. We have to make them publicly available. We have to do all we can to really show that we're doing this in partnership with the public, and we have the public's trust built through our transparency and our complete disclosure of what we're learning and how we're applying that to the commercialization of new treatments and vaccines.
Yeah, and Phil, did you want to add something on this? On maybe what's at stake with the industry's reputation, or if not, I think we've had some good comments on this topic, but I wanted to give you a chance too.
Yeah, no, maybe I wanted to take a slightly different twist on the question, less about industry reputation, but more about, maybe just reflecting on some of the earlier comments, whether or not we call it last mile. I think that as an industry, many of us, for those of us in industry, obviously we see ourselves as members of industry, but I think we also, see ourselves as members of society, and therefore, what is our societal duty? And I guess I only bring that up because, yes, creating a vaccine and a therapeutic is really, really hard. But I think we're all also acknowledging that just the last mile delivery will probably be even harder. And educating the public and building their trust will be an order of magnitude higher. One of the things that I'm mindful of is, yes, everyone criticizes flu vaccines for not working that well. But let's be honest, we've had flu vaccines for decades now. Many people don't take them or distrust the use of those vaccines. We had 35 million people in 2019 get the flu despite the flu vaccine. Now, part of that is because the flu vaccine didn't work for everyone, but a part of that is people didn't want to take it. And so we as a society have an urgent need for science education and to really elevate the level of discussion so that, we, as was pointed out, we need simple messages, but we need not oversimplified messages. And I think that is something that I really think a lot about, because as members of the biotech community, it is certainly our foremost job to put the patient first and to develop drugs. But I think we also have an obligation to recognize that the bigger duty ahead of us as members of society is that last mile problem, whether it's education or delivery. And I think that that's something that we need to be mindful of, because I think that, creating the new drug is the cool, quote unquote, cool part, but the rest is what's really going to make an impact on society.
Yeah, and there's been, several of you have mentioned that, the amount of collaboration that's happening in the industry and how important that is, and transparency has been, another word that people have mentioned as being critically important for a number of reasons, not just ensuring folks that a vaccine or a therapeutic is safe and effective, but being transparent about process items and, when things can be expected and, how they'll be used. And I'm curious if, through this collaboration that's happening, is there a sense that the industry will move more toward outsourcing, different business processes? And Karen, I thought, I'd love to get your take on this. I mean, and one of my questions with this is if there is more outsourcing through this vast collaboration that happens, is there a risk of transparency being lost through those kinds of handoffs between partners?
I think overall within the industry group, within the health ecosystem, but specifically within pharma, outsourcing has always been a big part of their process, whether it's, clinical research organizations, CMOs, as well as, back office functions. I think the key there is making sure you're really understanding the risks of what you are outsourcing. And I do believe, when we talked at the beginning of this session, when the pandemic hit, understanding where those risks were and those third-party risks and the downstream impacts became very apparent if companies had proper protocols and processes and response rates in place, that they were able to certainly control any aspects of risk, whether it's cyber, privacy, as you go into a virtual remote working environment. But what I would say is I'm not sure it's as more outsourcing versus the collaboration of the side-by-side intersects being much more, closing the gaps is maybe what I would say better, and working alongside each other to make sure those gaps and those handoffs are more aligned with the outcome at the end of the day, versus when you outsource, people are looking for usually a lower cost provider or more, specialized, ability to manufacture something quicker. I do think it's closing those care gaps that help make the process more efficient from innovation to outcome.
Excellent. Great. There was a question that we're going to move into our Q&A here. We're coming up on the end of our time. We've got about 8 minutes left, but there was a question that came in about, and maybe Peter, I'll direct this one to you, which is how will regulatory agencies decide when to resume on-site inspections post-pandemic? Is there a specific, testing positivity rate in a given geography, or are there other factors that regulators will be looking at and making determinations about, on-site inspections?
Yeah, so it's a great question. For routine inspections, it's going to mainly be looking at the positivity rate in the area that we'd have to be going to in terms of the safety of the inspectors that are there. In some cases, we've been lucky enough that there are inspectors who are in a given location that can take care of some of these, and we've leveraged that for important inspections. The other piece that does factor into this somewhat is the pressing nature of an inspection. For instance, we do have some pretty important vaccines and monoclonals coming around, and so we'll take into account that. But you're exactly right that the major thing that will let us get back to doing routine inspections will be the epidemiology in the various locations where facilities are.
Great. And then I've got another question that came in. I think this is a follow-up to something you said, Peter, and maybe I'll come back to you and let Ken comment first. But it's a question about what academic clinical trial organizations could do better. I mean, is there an opportunity to move out of traditional clinical sites? We've heard a lot about decentralized trials, virtual trials, and someone mentioned that they've been piloted, and I think, I'm curious about the extent to which they've actually taken hold. But Ken, what would you say about academic clinical trials and maybe how they could adapt going forward?
Yeah, it's kind of a loaded question because there are so many models that are now being used. even within the category of decentralized trials, some are actually being conducted very close to the design of the protocol, but they're using telemedicine. Others have now conscripted a home nursing professional or a home visiting professional, or they're now delivering study drug directly to the patient's home. And all kinds of sites have adapted to that, whether it's an academic site, it's a for-profit, community-based site. I think part of the issue is that it's mostly now very much reactive approaches that are being taken. A lot of the sites, in fact, 60% of sites indicated before the pandemic that they had never had experience with a remote approach, a remote supported approach. So for many sites, this is all very, very new to them. It requires training, it requires systems that can support data that's collected remotely, data that can be integrated with patient health data and observational data. So it's not just for a single group of sites, but for most sites. There's a lot that they need to do to prepare and accommodate these types of approaches if we expect to see them long term.
Right. And Peter, did you want to add anything to that about, how the clinical trials enterprise could move forward or be more effective?
Yeah, I actually would be a little controversial here, or maybe a little, I think it needs to be shaken up some. I think that the thing that this pandemic is something that we happened into by accident, which is that I think that for the next pandemic that comes around, we need to have what is the equivalent of a pandemic pragmatic clinical trial preparedness plan, from doing a tremendous amount on each individual patient to try to draw the most data from each individual patient with interventions and tests, to using lots of people distributed, real world, so to speak, and being able to fewer data points, perhaps, fewer assessments, but though safety in numbers, just being able to have more data from that, using potentially remote assessments, etc. So I think that we structure this overall so we don't have the proverbial academic quagmire of, I want it this way, you want it this way, and then we end up with the lowest common denominator of not really studying the most important questions. Good authority, because I was one of those people once too for about 15 years of my career. So I know what it's like. But I think in this pandemic, that I think if I had to say who led and who lagged a bit, I'd say industry led, and academics, it's not a knock. It's just they weren't prepared the same way, and we need to be more prepared to move into a different mode next time something like this comes around, which I hope is the 12th of never, but I think we have to be prepared.
Is there a way to incentivize that shift, Peter? Do you have any thoughts about what incentives might need to change?
Yeah, I think it's actually how you reimburse for trial. I think we have to figure out how you would deal with trial reimbursement, how you would, and academic centers, it would be how was credit types of trials, who runs them. Those are a lot of issues which I think would have to be dealt with. But I think the main incentive would be to essentially figure out a way to make sure that you could compensate the local trial while to participate.
All right. Well, I think we're going to have to bring it to a close here, unfortunately. I want to thank all of the panelists for a really excellent discussion.